Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition, the August edition of Carallel's Caregiver Journey webinar series. This is Matt Perrin, Director of Caregiver Engagement here at Carallel. And today we're talking about caring for a loved one who refuses help. And I'm thrilled, beyond thrilled, to have a special guest for this discussion. He's coming to us today from Washington, D.C. He brings over 25 years of bipartisan experience in the executive and legislative branch of our government and his personal caregiving experience to his work as CEO of Caregiver Action Network, John Schall. Hey, John, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Matt. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, well, I'm really happy. You're making my job easier having you here, so thank you. John, as we typically do, I got a little bit of housekeeping to do, and then we'll jump right in if that's all right. So,
sure thing.
Yeah, in case anyone's joining one of these sessions for the first time, just a quick snippet on Carallel and who we are. We're a caregiver support company. So we help caregivers in two primary ways. First and foremost with a caregiver helpline that's available by phone, email, or chat. And then we complement that personalized human support with a suite of digital tools called My Care Desk, which is a content repository of all the educational content that you need, as well as a bunch of tools to organize your caregiving life, ask for help, keep track of important documents and task lists, etc. So human support complemented by digital tools, all for the benefit of caregivers. That is, in a nutshell, what Carallel does. The second piece of housekeeping, more important for this session, John, is please do, audience members, please do share comments, experiences, questions in the chat. John and I are the only ones on screen, but we very much think of this as a dialogue with all of you. So please don't be shy. I think that's all the housekeeping I've got for John for today, John. So I guess kicking us off, John, we typically start with a poll, but I'd love to just get your perspective on your caregiving experience. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It's like a lot of people, I'm sure, on the phone. It takes up so much of your life. I and my siblings are caregivers for my mother, and I'm doing it long distance. I live in DC, she lives in Michigan. And it's been going on, I would say, for 11 years. 11 years ago, actually next week, 11 years ago, my mother had a stroke from being the caregiver from my father. Just the stress of that role that comes with the challenges of being a caregiver. You know, she was in perfect health. My dad was 13 years older and taking all sorts of medication, but she's the one who had the stroke from that stress of being the caregiver. And so, you know, the caregiving journey began. Thankfully, her recovery from stroke through physical therapy and other things was 95%. But then, of course, in the last couple of years, you know, my mother's now 91. She get the memory loss, she get some of the dementia, which is a whole new chapter in caregiving. So, you know, it's definitely kept me hopping. It's certainly, my real life experience certainly informs what I have to do on the job for the national nonprofit for family caregivers. But, you know, I can say to all of us, these caregiving challenges keep you hopping.
That is for sure. I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your own personal context, John. I think it's helpful. I know it's helpful for me to hear, and certainly helpful, hopefully, for the audience to hear. Because again, this, you know, I view these discussions, these sessions as peer conversation. That's how I look at them. So thank you very much for that. We typically start out with a poll to gauge, to read the room, as it were, John. So that's what I'm going to launch right now, just to get a sense of what prompted people to join today's session. My loved one refuses help from me or other family members. My loved one refuses paid help, or I'm not there yet, but I'm curious for the future. So, okay, John, and we have the votes coming in fast and furious. Right now we're about 50%. Oh, no, 45%. My loved one refuses help from me and other family members. 36%, my loved one refuses paid help, and then just under 20%, I'm just curious for the future. So we have majority of the vote in. I'll go ahead and close the poll. Any thoughts on sort of where the audience is, John? About as expected.
My thought is this, and you know, kind of jives with what I'm always anecdotally hearing from people across the country. That you can see it's all sorts of situations, different situations where your loved one is refusing help. You know, might be refusing help from you as the son or daughter, or really resistant to the notion of now bringing in a stranger into the house for paid care. And I think we're going to find that throughout this half an hour that we talk about this, that there are just so many different types of circumstances where you end up in this real resistance to receive care. And some of that we just have to tease apart and talk about those different circumstances, those different situations, because how to handle them really can differ depending on those circumstances.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to get us started, actually, that's a really good segue. Is John, we typically try and be super focused in these conversations on the practical realities of the topic, right? We try not to talk in theory. We're talking about lived experiences with care, with the person that we're helping, our loved one refusing help, and then we'll after we sort of do a little bit of sharing, as it were, we'll go ahead and talk through some practical suggestions for tips, tricks, strategies to help make this just a little bit easier. Unfortunately, there's no magic wand, but through the sharing comes some helpful insight we found on these sessions. So that's the agenda for the next 23 minutes or so. So I guess, John, one where I'd like to start is with our own experience, right? And I was thinking, as I was thinking about this session, how would I describe when my mom, in my case, who was living with Alzheimer's disease, how would I describe the emotions, the feelings when she was refusing the help that I knew she needed, right? So I guess I pose that question to you and to the audience at large, for anyone that's willing to share in the chat. Like, how would you describe that to someone? For me, it became maddening, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
You know, it's fascinating, the emotional response you have as the caregiver when that's happening, and your loved one is just so resistant and refusing care. You know, you can feel angry, you can feel hurt, you can feel personally offended, you can feel sad about it. But the one thing I always say, so tough to do, is kind of immediately try to disengage your emotional reaction to the fact that your loved one is refusing care. You know, especially with our older loved ones, you know, we have some dementia or memory loss. There really isn't, if you think about it, a personal element to it. They're not so much saying, I refuse care from you. Yeah, they're kind of saying that. But you know, what's going on in the mind is really quite different. And if you can disengage that sort of, first of all, emotional reaction that you have, and then just kind of play out the circumstance, it can make all the difference in the world. You know, I have discovered with my mother, you know, you just, at some point when that happens, you just go on, distract to some other subject, do something else for an hour. You know, the resistance to the care may change an hour from now. There's just no guarantee that it's going to stay consistent. You know, I noticed this with my mother because with her Alzheimer's, she does occasionally get, you know, those moments of agitation, we call them in the health world, but you know them, they're the angry moments or the really resistant moments or the just kind of aggressive moments. It's fascinating to see because my mother's one of the sweetest, calmest, loving little old ladies you ever met in your life. But you know, there'll be the occasional morning where I'm not going to have anything to do with those pills, and that sweet little lady can pick up that walker and throw it across the room. It just happens. But to be able to disengage from the immediate, you know, emotional response we have and kind of play out the circumstance over time, can really make a big difference for us.
Yeah, I wrote down that word. I love that word, disengage. And it's sort of similar to another general theme that I think about really across the board in caregiving, which is, you know, I in my head, I tell myself to try and stay fact-based instead of emotional. But I want to just go one step deeper on disengage. How do you do that? How do you do that? You know, are there tricks that you use to get yourself to disengage? Do you just walk away? Do you count to 10? I mean, tactically speaking, how do you what's worked for you to actually get yourself to disengage?
It's, you know, it's a great question. You know, I think for me, because I'm just not an impulsive type person anyway, you know, I can just take a pause for, you know, a few seconds, as my mom is, you know, refusing or being resistant, and just kind of take a few breaths and just not react immediately. I will say with my sisters, I see sometimes very, very different, you know, who find it very tough to get that, you know, that little emotional distance there for a few seconds or a couple of minutes before they react. And, you know, one sister will react right off the bat and, you know, kind of be angry or something. That doesn't do you much good. One sister has learned to walk away for, you know, just go in the kitchen for a minute or something and come back out. But you got to find your little way of dealing with it. And, you know, everybody's personality is different, but you got to consciously think of some way to, you know, like as we say, disengage, or as you say, get back to being fact-based and not just reacting to the refusal.
Yeah. I'm chuckling thinking about or hearing you talk, just because. So my wife and I were both each caring for a parent, one of which was living in our home. Both had a form of dementia, and we had young children in the house also. And in those moments when I'd get frustrated, my wife would just look at me and say, "You need a timeout." So anyway, now that I'm hearing you talk, I was disengaging. I guess in my experience, sort of mirrors a lot of what you were just sharing, John. I mean, there was I guess one point I'd draw out is there were sort of a couple different kinds of refusing help, or the refusal of different kinds of help is a better way to say it. One being sort of the help that you were talking about and sort of describe just daily activities of daily life, you know, bathing, brushing teeth, hygiene, getting out of bed, these sorts of things. And I had all of that, but then also the refusal of paid help was a big one too. And a lot of what you're talking about in terms of disengaging, I think really applied there. And I guess the last thing I'd say, I see a question here that we'll get to. Actually, let's get to that question now because we're in the flow. So I have trouble with my mother accepting in-home paid care for my father who has dementia. So this is a help for the helper sort of situation. So it's the spouse, not the person needing caregiving, who's resistant, and she's overwhelmed with the caregiving. So I first off, my just gut reaction is just an outpouring. My heart goes out to the person that asked the question, and I would, unfortunately, there is no magic wand, but a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about, I think we've been talking about and we'll be talking about, I think could apply to this situation as well. You know, where we're trying to help the person that's actually doing the hands-on helping. What would you add to that, John?
Well, first of all, I would say to the person who posed the question in the comment, very, very, very common. More often than not, you know, we're in this situation where either the loved one or the family themselves are really resistant to the notion of bringing in a stranger into the house to help as paid home care. But it's worth looking at why, right? Why are we resistant to this? It's you know, it's common, and it's a little bit, you know, kind of human nature. You know, it's a person we don't know yet, right? They're going to be coming into our house. They're going to, you know, be there for hours. They're providing, you know, probably pretty intimate care for our loved one. They have access to everything in our house. So you really have to kind of psychoanalyze yourself a bit and see, what is it that you're afraid of? What is it you're resistant to? What is it that, scares you or just holds you back from doing it? And then I think what happens is, if you get through all that, and obviously you want to be cautious, right? Until you get to know the person, but then you will get to know that person. And, my mother was very, very resistant to having us have a couple of paid in-home caregivers to help her out. And God knows if she knew that, what you pay for that, she'd even have more of a reaction as older people do to anything that costs anything nowadays. But, once she got to know those caregivers, she loves them. In most cases, that's going to happen with the family as well. Now, if it doesn't happen, always remember, this is entirely in your control. You are never saddled with any particular home care help that you're paying for if it doesn't meet your satisfaction. I don't care if you don't like that person, completely fine. You go back to that agency and say, I need a different person. Always worth doing. People wait far too long when it's a situation that it doesn't quite meld. But it's very important for you to just stand up and say, nope, let's try somebody else. But it is worth, getting in there in the first instance and try to get over your resistance, because you need a lot more help than you're letting yourself on.
Yeah.
If you're gotten to the point where you know that you could use some paid in-home care help, I can guarantee you're 6 months beyond where you should have had some paid in-home care help. So, try to push through that resistance and give it a try, because you need a lot more help and some breaks for yourself than you realize.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to the, I guess, last point on that question, I urge you to send an email with the question if you want to talk more about it. I'd love to continue that conversation, because like everything in caregiving, it's a big topic, right? And there's a lot to consider, and there's a lot to sort of ground ourselves in. So, and I want to get into the tips, because that's the bulk. But one other thing I'd add to all of this, and this is really from a perspective of being on the other side of caregiving, which I am as of April of this year. But looking back, as mad and as frustrating as I got when my mom or my father-in-law was refusing help and sort of upending my day, getting through it was an incredible sense of confidence, or source of confidence for me. It gave me, it was a milestone in terms of my own personal confidence as a caregiver, because it was for a long time a seemingly unsurmountable problem that we were able to sort of cut through a little bit. So
I love to hear you say that. One thing I'm trying to always remind caregivers, and we always give yourself credit for doing one of the toughest jobs there is.
Yeah.
I mean, This is really tough stuff, folks, and none of us was born knowing how to do it, and there aren't cookbook recipes for the answers. So I love to hear that when you say it, just you got this feeling of confidence and satisfaction, because really, we are doing tremendous work. We always feel like, oh, we're falling short somehow, or this or that could be better, or maybe I should be more dedicated. Heck with all of that. It's amazing the job you're doing, and one of the most difficult things I can think of is a life job.
Agreed, and rewarding, by the way. So let's spend the next, we have 11 minutes. Let's just jump into the tips. And John, I think you unintentionally segued into one of the first ones when you were talking about stepping back and in response to the question from the audience member who was having trouble getting her mom to accept help in the home as she's caring for the father. But the first tip or trick is resetting mindset, right? If I think about it, and sort of stepping back and taking stock of the situation. And for me, that could mean something different to everyone. But for me, that meant just the acknowledgement on my part that getting mom out of bed, getting her ready for the day, it wasn't going to take 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It was going to take 30 on a good day, 45, maybe longer, right? But just resetting my mind so that I am coming into the interaction with that sort of expectation and perspective was a huge help. What would you say to that, John?
A huge lesson to learn. If you're going to be operating on what you think is the normal clock of your life, you're just setting yourself up for failure. Everything takes so much longer. And the fact is, it may be that on a particular day, not all 6 or 7 things get done. You know, 4 or 5 is a real victory. So you just have to, reset your expectations. And that gives you a chance to declare success after an hour instead of feeling like, gosh, we could have done this in 10 minutes, which is something that's always in the back of our minds.
Right. I love how you put that. Now, if the first tip didn't give it away, and this is really targeted towards the audience, none of these things are big, bold, sort of crazy changes to make. They're all little things that sort of incrementally make life easier and better for both us as the caregiver and the person that we're caring for. So in that spirit, the second tip that I come to when I think about it, and it took me too long to learn this, but was taking, with those reset expectations or reset mindset that I just mentioned, John, taking a second to validate, or more than a second, but validating my mom's feelings in that situation, right? I was so caught up in getting the thing done that I was sort of projecting my own needs onto her and not validating my mom's feelings in the process. Maybe she wasn't feeling that well that day, or maybe she just wanted to try it herself. Things like that. So small change, but made a big difference. I mean, what would your take be on something, on a tip like that, John?
Well, I love your insight. It's almost strange to say it. It sounds strange to hear it. You almost have to get away of this, we need to do the right thing, right? Any particular moment, incident, whatever, might have a right thing to do. So what? The fact is, if your loved one just at that moment is resistant, they're resistant, but they're the patient. But nothing is so critical that you have to resolve it within those few minutes. And the other thing I think is interesting is that oftentimes it's not about what you might think it's about. The refusal to receive care isn't all or none. It's not all of a sudden mom is refusing to have any care. Well, it may be that the doctor says get as much exercise outdoors as possible. Mom just doesn't want to do that. But you figure out a little bit prodding through, it isn't that she doesn't want to do that particular action. It's, well, maybe she's afraid of incontinence, and you get out for a walk and have to go to the bathroom, and then what? You just never know what's behind that resistance. And sometimes you just gotta prod a little bit, get over this immediate sense of it's the right thing to do. We're going to go out and go for a walk, whether you want to go for a walk or not, and just kind of try to get it at the roots of it, and take some time to do it. Their resistance, you may think irrational or whatever you might want to think about it, but it's real, and it is the governing factor in any situation.
Yeah, and so I guess, John, I'd like to just go one level deeper on that, because and this is sort of related to the point that you made right from the jump in this conversation, which was every one of our situations, while we have, there's a lot of commonalities between them, sure. Each one of our situations is entirely different, right? So case in point, my context was as a dementia caregiver. My mom was living with Alzheimer's disease, and my father-in-law with Lewy body dementia. So there was a variable there, right, that in some ways made it much more difficult. They had trouble communicating at a certain point, right? But in other ways, it made it somewhat easier, if I could look at it in a different way, in that we, for the same reason, they had trouble communicating. So easier in contrast to say someone who doesn't have a cognitive impairment, right, but needs the help, and is very much able to articulate like they always have, and clearly state their needs, wants, etc. So that to me seems almost more difficult, right? And I guess I don't feel as deep a connection to that sort of scenario. How would you think about how do people think about that, right? When there can be that conversation and articulation between each other, and there's still the resistance.
And that one can be extremely frustrating. It's a whole different kind of a psychological reaction to it when you're otherwise able-bodied, clear-thinking, rational, sensible loved one, just you know, all of a sudden just doesn't want to do that. You know, think about it. In a really extreme case, you're a 26-year-old soldier coming back from a conflict. Now you're a double amputee, probably pretty serious wound, maybe a wound you wouldn't have survived during the Vietnam War, but now you survive. Isn't the life you kind of expected. You're back home with your spouse, you know, you're in your late 20s, and all of a sudden, your whole sense of yourself as this strong, independent, able to do anything person is challenged in very real ways. We always have to remember the caregiver and the patient are both on an emotional roller coaster, but they're not on the same roller coaster. We're like at one of those amusement parks where the two roller coasters is twisting together, and sometimes this one's on a hill and sometimes this one's in the valley. That's how it is between the patients and the caregivers. You know, you could be a situation where your loved one's cancer went into remission. The loved one is so thrilled, doesn't want to talk about cancer at all for as long as they can, finally got it off their mind. But you as the caregiver are thinking, oh my God, the next shoe's going to drop sometime and we're going to be back in this. Very, very different places. So to me, a lot of this is we just didn't talk in the first place and didn't continue to talk about what our goals and wants are. Yeah. They are very different from patients and caregivers. And yeah, it's really a goal setting. It's first of all talking about, you know, what do you want, my loved one, in your care? You know, what do I want for you? Making those both clear. They're not always going to agree, but sometimes just bringing them to light makes a whole lot easier to then work yeah, through the refusal. And I'll just say one last thing about it. In most cases, that hasn't been done ahead of time and hasn't been done with a doctor. So your loved one may never have kind of agreed, signed on to the care treatment plan in the first place. It was yeah, something the doctor said, we're going to do it this way. Conversation has to be had with the family caregiver, the patient, and the doctor. Let's all talk about our goals, doctor. Just don't impose a treatment plan. Let's talk about what, you know, is really feasible, or, you know, psychologically where I am, and what I really will buy into.
Yeah, and not just once, right? Over time, I would imagine. So we're almost at time, John. I want to just I'll throw one more tip in there. A close friend of mine who had been through something similar to what I was living through with my mom and father-in-law gave me this tip one day, and it stuck with me because it was kind of catchy. But collaborate, don't mandate, right? And her point was do it with, not for, right? Which is, you know, I guess if you think about it in terms of a mindset shift, that was another one that really, really helped me do that. So we have one question that we didn't get to, actually a few, but I will get to them via email after this call. I guess hopefully people found this helpful. No, a couple questions. All the questions, John. Sorry, I'm not distracted. I'm looking at the questions come in.
No, that's
like
great.
Underneath the TV.
I'd love to see them later too, so we can respond.
Yeah. So, what? I guess parting words for the audience. Hopefully, everybody found this helpful. But what would your parting thoughts be?
3 things. Try to avoid having an immediate emotional reaction to the fact that your loved one is refusing help. It isn't about you. Secondly, it's more likely than not about something else. Pain, incontinence, finances, something's behind that refusal. So yeah, you don't take anything at surface level. And thirdly, you know, keep in mind what's happening now, what's happening this hour, isn't necessarily going to help you. They're going to be next Tuesday. So yeah, refusal to care is not necessarily permanent. It's not necessarily for all time. It's in the moment. but really one half day at a time, because it can be very different by this evening. And next week might look completely different.
I love that. John, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Everyone that attended, thank you so much for being here for another edition of our Caregiver Journey webinar series. Hope to see you on September 28th for our next edition. Topic that I'm pretty excited about, and it's understanding dementia from the perspective of a person living with it. So should be a great discussion. September 28th at 12 p.m. Eastern. John, thanks a million. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Take care, everyone.